Hi everyone, welcome to Camilla Cava Food Photography Podcast, a place where I interview talents in the food photography industry to help you and myself grow a food photography career. On today's podcast, I talk with Rachel Korinek of Two Love Studio, an Australian food and still life photographer based in Vancouver. As a photographer, Rachel is known for bright and uplifting visual storytelling. As a teacher, her love for educating has inspired her to share her knowledge with both novice and expert alike through her insightful blog, ebooks, and courses. Rachel has worked for clients like Nikon, Huff Post, Aldi, and many more. In this episode, besides talking about Rachel's decade-long journey working in the commercial photography industry, we deep dive into the topic of building a great food photography portfolio. So let's welcome Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be able to speak to you today.
It's so lovely to have you here. I've been following your work for a while, so it's truly an honor to have you
Thank you so
on my
much.
podcast.
Yeah.
So for the listeners that might not know about you, could you tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, what do you do?
Yes, I'm Rachel Korinek. Currently, I've added beverage work to my sort of repertoire. So I say I'm a food and beverage photographer these days. So I'm an Australian. I currently live in Vancouver, Canada, and I have nearly been doing this for 10 years, which is just seems amazing to me. So I sort of fell into food photography very randomly, but I had this like wild burning sensation inside of me that was like, wow, this is a thing and it looks so cool, and things just kind of happened from there. And like 10 years is a long time when you look back at all the things you've done, but consistently I've just tried to learn new things, tried to practice all the time, try to get better, failed a lot, but you learn a lot over that period. So I also teach how to do food photography. So some people may not know, but I'm actually a teacher turned photographer. So it's really special for me to be able to like bring that full circle and come back to teaching, which I really love, and teach about a subject I'm really passionate about. So I'm super lucky in that respect.
Wow, yeah, because you've been a teacher before you became a photographer. So how did you got into food photography in the first place then?
Uh, so I had just finished my teaching degree. So I worked as like a teacher's aide during doing my degree, and then I worked in schools for a while, and then I ended up moving states in Australia, and now my teaching registration didn't automatically move from state to state. So I was going to have to do some new training, and I needed a job at the time, so I just had another job. And I'd previously sort of discovered food photography, and I was like just taking photos and sort of working on photography. And then I just sort of decided that, you know, the timing just felt like I needed to pursue this. So I just sort of started working on that part time just to see what sort of happened. But I came across food photography very randomly. Like most people, you don't actually realize that food photography is a thing, but it's everywhere. Like every time we go grocery shopping, and there's food images everywhere, but a lot of people they aren't conscious about that until you realize that it's actually a niche. And I came across Helen Desjardins' book Plate to Pixel. Well, my husband did actually, and he was like, "Wow, look at this, and you can learn it." And I was just mesmerized by this idea. So that's sort of how I came across it.
And then you've been doing it for 10 years. My God, how exciting.
Yes.
And is it still exciting to this day after 10 years doing food photography?
It's really interesting. It is, but it's also very different. I think you personally go through different stages as a creative. So it is exciting, but it's exciting in different ways. And there's so much to learn with photography in general. There's always new things to learn. And I think I found drink photography recently, which is really exciting. Or then you might want to develop like a different sort of style, or you might want to do something that's more editorial or more commercial. So I think there's always ways for it to still be exciting. It can be very monotonous as well. So I think it's always a new mix of feelings that you sort of have to work through that's really interesting over time.
Interesting, yeah, because you can even specialize in specific, like what you said with the drinks. Like you can specialize in drinks, and then it's a completely new world that opens
Yes,
up, niche
exactly.
within a niche,
Yeah.
which yeah, and all the time learning what you say, because also technology develops and the needs for like video, stop motion, and
Yes,
cinematographic
exactly
things
right.
like that.
So
Yeah,
it's
true,
always a mix of like
true.
exciting, inspiring, overwhelming, and scary, I think.
Damn, yeah, true, exciting. And then, I mean, another question that I have for you is you're doing so many things at the same time, right? Like you're doing your food photography. I assume you work with the clients as well. You're doing educational things. You're taking care of your social media. Like how does it all come together and how do you balance all of this?
You
Because it
know,
seems like a lot.
it is a lot. And I was asking myself this very recently. Like,
Yeah.
I used to do it all myself. And I think, how did I ever do that? And I've really been trying to think about like, was I just more efficient or was I more motivated? Or is there actually just way more to do now, like every
Uh-huh.
single year? And I think the answer is probably yes to all those questions. I think after doing this for so long and thinking
Mm-hmm.
back to what you had to do 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today, there is so much more to do today. And it's
Mm-hmm.
almost impossible to do it all yourself.
Mm.
And it is interesting that like people will look and think that you do all these things, but sometimes behind the scenes, it's like you may not be coping, or you might not be actually doing
Mm-hmm.
everything, or you might have help, or you might be saying, people do say to me like they feel like I'm everywhere, and I'm like, I'm definitely not everywhere. And I think some of that comes from after doing it for so long, there is so much content out on there, the
Mm-hmm.
internet, that you can bump into me in multiple places.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, there is a lot more to do. Like, we're adding video and reels, and there just seems to be so much access to so many different ways to like grow an online
Mm-hmm.
business, and a photography business these days, that which do you pick and choose? So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have been good in picking the things that like work for me. Like I am on Facebook, but I never had like a Facebook group or a Facebook page that I updated because it just was too much, and like I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't on Twitter. So I feel like I've tried to pick things that sort of work for me, but
Makes sense.
also,
Uh-huh.
as you move through your business, you want to sort of get people that can help you out. So I do have some people
Mm-hmm.
that work for me and help
Oh, great.
me run things, especially my emails.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do my emails a lot. But like I love doing
So
my emails,
good.
but
Yeah.
you get to a point where you could just spend
Yeah.
all your time in your emails. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So you build a great team around your business, basically. You're not doing that alone anymore.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I don't
that's
think
good.
that I think that's a really hard thing to do, is to find people that are good people, that also like
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to do what you need, but also have like the time. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and picking your battles, what you say, prioritizing what you actually want to become super good at instead of doing a little bit of everything like
It's
Facebook group and Instagram group and whatever. Like, I cannot
Yeah,
think of it.
and I
Yeah,
think there's
that makes
like
sense.
it's TikTok and there's Clubhouse and it's
Yep.
all the things. And like as a creative, I think, like Google Stories, it just is never ending. It's always gonna be like that. I think
There's
it'll
always
probably get
something.
worse
Uh-huh.
as technology moves forward. And like like this idea of being a content creator is crazy, because it's like creativity and creating content, they're not always aligned.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard just to churn out things all the time. So you have to, I think after a while you realize that thing that you have, that your creativity is really special and precious, and you have to protect it. And I'm definitely not, it's something I'm still learning, and I'm always, having difficulties with boundaries and things like that. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think it is hard to do it all yourself. So either just choosing the things you really want to focus on that bring you
Yeah,
joy, that also work for your business, but then also getting people to help you too.
makes sense. And out of curiosity, do you still work with the clients? Do you still do client work or do you completely concentrate right now on education?
My ideal is to have both.
Mm-hmm.
I do have clients that I work for, and that's always changing. And I think one of the most interesting things is when I moved from Australia, um, I lost a lot of client base and I had to start
Oh,
over. And
yeah.
I always knew that was going to take time. And
Mm-hmm.
when you move to a different market, that's on the other side of the world. It's not like it's just another, you know, like in Europe, it might be easier because things are a bit more connected. But,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
from Australia to Canada, it's very different. It's very far.
Uh-huh.
So I knew things I would have to start over again. And it actually took longer than I thought, because there's time when you move, people have to get to know you, but then we also had all the crazy stuff that's happened from 2020 onwards that put like a big roadblock in some of that. So it's one of those things where that's just sort of the life of a freelancer. So I'm always working on like what I want to do, and I'm very lucky at this point in my career that I can pick and choose the clients and
That's
projects that I
nice.
want to
Yeah.
work on. But I think there's always, like, as you grow as a photographer, there's always, you know, different things or different clients or magazines or brands or jobs that you want to work on. So it's always something that I'm trying to balance between the two.
Right, that makes sense. How long ago did you move to Canada then?
It
I thought
has
it was...
been 3.5 years.
Ah, that's really not that long time ago.
Yeah. No,
Okay, right.
it feels like yesterday, but also a lifetime, because a lot's happened
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
world
yeah.
in
Oh
that
gosh,
time, you
yeah,
know. So
yeah, that's true. Awesome. Well, what I really wanted to talk to you about is, and what I still didn't had as a conversation here yet on the podcast, is about portfolio, because I love your portfolio, and I
oh,
know
thank
you've
you.
also done a blog post about it, as far as I remember,
Yeah, I
because
have
I
a
was
few. I think I
reading.
have a few actually.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I thought it's a good topic to talk about because it's so important. It is so goddamn important. The good food photography portfolio, if you want to find the right clients and if you want to find clients overall.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, my first question would be, like, how do you build a good portfolio? Do you have some tips and ideas?
Yeah. I think portfolios have changed, and it really depends on like what sort of jobs you want to do and what sort of
Mm-hmm.
clients you want to create. In a way, I think Instagram has also become like a portfolio. It's a place for us to share things that we may want to like clients to know, or we want to put work out there, but it won't necessarily make it into our portfolio. It's in a way
Mm-hmm.
that we can also like update it with a little bit more flexibility too. So I think these days, even though Instagram is changing, I think a lot of clients do want to look at people's Instagram as well, because they also know that like we don't update our portfolio every day.
Yeah.
It's a place for us to also share behind the scenes a little bit more about who we are. So I think Instagram and portfolio are really important these
Mm-hmm.
days. So if you're just getting started, I'd say starting to build like your Instagram portfolio is a really great way to start. And then you can start building your portfolio. And one of the things that I think people get stuck with is they think that their portfolio is like set in stone, or, you know, I've got to have all these things before I can launch it. But
Mm-hmm.
really, our portfolio is always evolving. So
Mm-hmm.
I always encourage people to sort of get their best work, put it up, get it out there, and then start making changes as you go. Because if if you keep it in draft mode and you want to make it perfect, then no one's going to see it. And that can take like, sometimes that can take months or years before people,
Oh gosh, yeah.
are ready to like put that out there. So I would pick a tool, like I use Squarespace for mine because it's just
Mm-hmm.
very clean, simple, user friendly.
Yeah.
Their support is really great. So something that's really clean and minimal that, people can really look at your photos, I
Mm-hmm.
think is the main thing. Um, and then you can sort of get more into like what would you actually like put on the website or your
Mm-hmm.
portfolio site. So this is an interesting one, and I've talked to many photographers, and I've been to portfolio reviews at conferences and things like this. So like people want to know like what is a magic number of how
Uh-huh.
many photos do we put in, and I think it's really different. And I've seen some photographers that just have 15 images in their portfolio, and that's sort of
Mm-hmm.
it. And then Eva Kolenko, who I absolutely adore, her portfolio is huge. Like I could endlessly scroll through it. I actually love it because her work is so beautiful. So
Uh-huh.
I think there's so many different things out there. What I would encourage people not to do is feel like they have to hit a number and just start putting lots of images in.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be really hard when you're starting out to get 30 images to put in your portfolio. So I would sort of start anywhere with like 10 to 15 that you think are really strong, and then start to build from there.
Mm-hmm.
I also was lucky enough to do a portfolio review for Finette Rickett, who runs the Edit framework. And I see this people doing similar things, and I definitely did this at the beginning, but we tend to, maybe because we don't have as many images, or maybe we feel like we have to show everything to a client. But if you do like one shoot, for example, and there's 3 images and they're all very, very similar, you want to pick the best
Mm-hmm.
one,
Mm-hmm.
ideally, because people or clients are really busy. If you scroll through, to say we scroll through like the top third of the website, or something like that, you do like 3 scrolls and you have 3 shoots and there's 9 photos and they're like 3 the same, 3 the same, 3 the same. People are really busy, so like suddenly we're only showing them 3 things we can do rather than like 9 different images as well. So we just want to keep in mind too that people are really busy, so how can we get like our best work out in front of them? So choosing like the best shot from one shoot. And one thing I learned from a really successful photographer, um, what he would do is, if he just say he had 3 images from a shoot that he loved, he couldn't choose between them. What you can actually do is put the first one in, then 90 days later you can swap it out for the next one, and then swap it out for the next one. So there are ways that you can like share all of that. It's just not necessarily all of once, which is, I thought, was a really good tip, and something
Yeah,
that I like to try to think about.
that makes sense. That's a really good
Yeah.
tip. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then what would you say, like, in terms of the, because just putting all these images on a website is not enough, right? There still needs to be some sort of curated way of putting them
Yeah, like a
together.
pagination. Yeah. So one of the things that stands out for me the most was, I sent my portfolio to a publisher. This was quite a few years ago, and I split up my portfolio into light and dark, because I feel like everybody was doing that at the time, and
Yeah.
you look to people, and if they're doing that, you sort of copy them.
Mm-hmm.
So again, these people are really busy, and he looked at my portfolio, which is very kind, and he wrote back to me and he said, really love your work, but I wouldn't hire you because you can only do light work, and we really need someone who can do both. And I was like, I have a dark portfolio. It's just in a different part of the website.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
he was too busy, because imagine how many these people are trying to do their job. They
Yeah.
would get so many emails, and he didn't click around. And that's not his fault. Like, we need to capture people quicker. So that was I've never sort of split it up like that again. I've always made sure my portfolio was paginated to show different moods I can capture, different light, different food, different angles, different stories, different shadows. All of those things I try to make in a way that's cohesive to move through the portfolio, because again, we want to capture those people's attention quickly, and I want to show people like that, yes, I can do light, yes, I can do moody, or I can do really dark, or I can do hard shadows and light shadows, or color backgrounds, and white surfaces. So that was another really huge learning for me a couple of years ago, and that's kind of how I focus on paginating my portfolio.
That makes sense. So from the first look, we can see that you can do a lot of things.
Exactly. Some people also have like a quick portfolio. I've seen them do that, which would be something like what you see on my portfolio. And then they would have different galleries that they might want to explore. Maybe it's a particular subject, like maybe it's just cocktails, or maybe it's like advertising or tears that they've done. So there's different ways that you can split it up. And I think it just needs to be clear on your website. Drop down menus, I think, don't work as well sometimes as like having all those different tabs on the side. So it just depends on how you want to structure it. So sometimes there's those things to think about when you get like a larger body of work.
Yeah, I was curious what you think about that, like splitting the portfolio in like savory, sweet, or whatever, or drinks, food, or things like that.
I mean, that for that reason, I tend to like want to have that quick portfolio. But then I think if you want to do that later, or like a portfolio that says like best work or something like that. I do have a black and white gallery on my website that is separate, and there's like a clear call to action to that. but
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that people will search for like as much. So in my opinion, that's okay to like split up. So, but everybody needs to, sometimes what works for me is not going to necessarily work for everybody. So you do want to, like, when you take advice, just take the things that you think are going to work for you, try things out. If they don't work, then you can explore other techniques as well. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you mentioned that you have black and white as a separate tab on your website. Is that because you would love to attract more work because you love doing black and white images, or is that because it's
I
completely different category from
Yeah,
those?
it sort of feels like when you put all those black and white images together, they really tell this amazing story that's cumulative.
Mm-hmm.
So I really felt like I wanted to have it separately on the site, just as like a passion sort of project, so
That's
that
really
people
cool.
can look at. Yeah,
Yeah, I saw it looks so pretty. It's such a
thank
cool
you.
project. Like, who would think about doing, I mean, food as a black and white, but it just looks really
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah, it can be a really interesting project for sure. Yeah.
yeah, really nice. Awesome. And what do you feel about putting client work in a portfolio as well? Or do you basically only put portfolio, like a passion project in there?
Yeah, I think it depends on what it is. And again, sometimes you can have those like breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
One advice that I did get from a very well respected photographer was to not just put your best work in. And that can be hard.
Oh, yeah,
So
I heard
even though
about
I
that.
say like you need to put your best work in, what she's sort of saying is like if there's an image that's good, but it's not your favorite, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
like you don't love it as much, maybe it shows some sort of skills or different stories. It's still important to add some of those types of
Mm-hmm.
things. So sometimes like we all know that client work can be really rewarding, and sometimes it also just is what it is. So the client needs something very specific and it's not like our favorite shoot. But if you
Mm-hmm.
can still put that in your portfolio to show certain skills, then I think it's really valuable. So I think it's going to come down to the individual. And maybe you have, maybe you did a client shoot and you're like, this was really fun. And then maybe you explored like a similar theme or something in your personal work and you want to put that in instead. I think that's fine too.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. But why is, because I've heard about this advice not to put the best of the work in there. Um, why do you think that is? Is that because you'd want to still surprise the client or something?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think you always want to present yourself in the best possible way, and clients are
Mm-hmm.
going to hire you for things that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
So someone is not going to hire me for something that I've never done.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say never, because I have had clients sometimes do that and I'm like, this is not what I do.
Yeah, yeah,
Why
yeah.
are we talking about this?
No, I
Um,
don't. Mhm.
but like if we talk about drinks photography, people didn't ask me for drinks photography before I started doing drinks photography. And now I
Mhm.
get a lot of clients asking me for that work. And that's because they can see it in my portfolio. They see me doing it on Instagram and they like it. They can see that what's possible. So it might not necessarily be like your best work, but you want to show them like what you can do and what they
Mhm.
can hire you for.
Mhm.
um, I think we can get really caught up as creatives as we only want to put things out there that's like best or perfect. And maybe they mean, rather than best work, maybe they mean perfect.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes you can get really caught up in, because nothing's perfect, and then we wouldn't put anything out. And you can look at your portfolio even 6 months later and think, oh, that's not my best work anymore. So
Oh yeah,
yeah, I would
that
look at
happens
it
quite
as you
often.
always want to put forward like the things you want to get hired for, what you're
Uh-huh.
really good at, so that clients know that those are the things that you can produce.
Yeah, and I think don't put things that you didn't like photographing as well. That's an important one. Like if you didn't like specific thing and you're not passionate
Yes, like
about it and you don't
events.
want to
I
wear
don't
it.
do events anymore because I don't enjoy them.
Yeah,
So
I
I
did it
just
once and
don't.
I was like, nope, nope. I really did not like it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a different type of shooting, and I think it's okay
yeah,
to explore and then say this is not
yeah,
necessarily for me. Yeah.
exactly. You can try it out and yeah. Yeah, nice. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. So when you plan, let's say you do you Okay, let's say you look at your portfolio. Do you plan your shoots, like portfolio shoots, the passion project shoots, around the portfolio to develop a portfolio further, or not
Yeah, I
really?
think it's always good to ask yourself, what skills can I still work on?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any gaps in your portfolio? Um, Sometimes, you know, I think there's certain things like I've been exploring things that are a little bit more like, I don't know what the word is like, but it's also like a pop art, like it's on a brightly colored background, you've
Uh-huh.
got hard shadows. It's just very like a highly stylized scene. Um, I don't really have that in my portfolio. Do I want to put that in my portfolio? Would I like clients to hire me for that? Is it something I'm interested in? And if the answer is yes, then maybe that's something I'm going to sort of explore.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's like food subjects as well that you don't have. So I think it's a combination between like what isn't in my portfolio, what am I interested in, and what's new skills do I want to bring that I can start working on to add to my body of work. Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. And then on portfolio projects, you work by yourself, or do you work with a food stylist?
I had a lovely food stylist in Melbourne that I worked with a lot before I moved.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, making those connections does take some time, but it is really wonderful to work with other people like art directors and stylists, even prop stylists, so that you can like work on different things, get
Mm-hmm.
inspired, learn different things. So I think those things are important too, because there are clients and jobs that require you to be a team player. So it's really good to show them that you can work as a team. So definitely something I recommend.
Makes sense. You worked with a prop stylist as well? How does that work? Like, I never worked with a
Um,
prop stylist yet.
so in North America, I know the US specifically,
Mm-hmm.
food styling and prop styling is two separate jobs.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
in Australia, they're usually the same person. So it just really depends on where you are. Like those
Mm-hmm.
jobs might be different. Yeah.
Interesting. And then the agency decides, or like a client or agency decides whether to work with a prop stylist, or is that you that suggest like you should work with a prop stylist and food stylist?
I think in the States, like most agencies would like know they need to hire someone, they would
Mm.
have someone.
Okay, perfect. I was curious because here I also didn't got the chance to work with prop stylists, but I think that would be really cool as well. And you have that.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
it's like to have access to props or even like a place that like,
Exactly.
you can rent them from.
Exactly.
There was a stylist I met in Toronto, and she had collected props for 20 years, and she had this amazing warehouse that you could rent things from.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and those people are very valuable too, because they've been doing it for so long. They
Uh-huh.
know what works for every sort of story that clients want to tell too. So
Oh, that's great. I should do more research, but I don't think because usually it's either agency arranges themselves or indeed a food stylist, but they don't have that much stuff. Or it's
yeah,
me that arranges. So that would be
it
really
probably
cool
yeah, it
to.
really depends on where you are. In Vancouver, it's
Uh-huh.
not. It's not like I've experienced in Melbourne and Toronto. Maybe because that's more of a film scene. There's more like
Mm,
propping for films, which is not what I. It's not someone that I would hire because it's very different. So
yeah, could be. But you usually work now on more commercial type or editorial type of projects with
I'd
clients,
still say more editorial.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like magazine work or not.
yeah, and client and just people who are looking for like social content,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
website stuff, recipes, those types of things. Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
Okay, one more random question because now I just went to completely random direction. But are you getting on TikTok or not?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's one of the battles that you picked.
I
More
think,
concentrating on
yeah,
Instagram, isn't it? Yeah.
and I think too, like, this sounds silly, but I just think as like a creative,
Mm-hmm.
there's our energy is so important, and like
Mm-hmm.
being on the computer and the phone all the time, I just find really a draining. And I think if you want to be on there and put effort into it, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think getting on there because everybody else is on there and not doing it well is actually not, for me personally, is just going to be a bit soul destroying. So I would really have to like want to be on there, and maybe that would change. Like maybe if Instagram disappeared completely, maybe it would be different. But I also just feel like I don't connect with what's going on TikTok currently. And I can see the TikTok vibe coming onto Instagram, and this is like not exactly what I'm interested in. So
No, that makes sense, because what you mentioned, you either become something super good, or if you're just doing some random videos because others are doing dances or whatever, it just doesn't make any sense. So you either put a lot of time in it, or it's just, worthless.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Nice. Okay. Now, couple of questions about your courses, because I know you have great educational resources,
thank
books
you.
as well, right? Like
Yeah, just
ebooks
like an
and
ebook
courses.
guide. Yeah.
So first of all, how did you well, obviously you became in more educational because you were a teacher beforehand, so you decided to share your food photography skills with others?
I guess how it really started, like I never intended to be any of this really. Like if I think back to when I started, I just did it for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I started working for clients full time, and that was sort of, there was some things happening in my life with family members being sick, and it was like probably years, like I was like going full time and then I had to pull back because something happened, and then going full time and pull back. So I ended up going full time, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a really tough year. I worked very hard. I made no money. I was completely burnt out and I had to take time off. And I said to myself, I really want to teach editing
Uh-huh.
and I have to do this for me. And so
Uh-huh.
I spent 3 months just writing the content for my Lightroom course.
Amazing.
I had no expectations. I was like, I really just, it's something that I really felt like I needed to do for me. And I really wanted to teach that content, and I was really passionate about it. So
Mm-hmm.
the response was really great when I first told people about it, and people, it's still one of my most popular courses and people love learning it. So that's kind of how it started. And I think I've always loved, like, I always started with the blog even before I knew what it was going
Mm-hmm.
to turn into. Like, I was there to share what I was learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the blog started. So it's kind of just a manifestation from that. And what I've really found over the years is like it's just another way for me to create that I almost enjoy a little bit more than taking photos sometimes. Like the whole editing videos part isn't, but like I get really excited about putting content together and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how can I teach people this tool really powerfully
Mm-hmm.
that's going to help them create something they're really proud of. So that's kind of how that started. Um, and it's been 4 years. I think I've
Uh-huh.
had that course for 4 years.
4 years. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So Lightroom one was the first one. And what else do you have right now? Because you have more courses for sure.
Yeah, I teach. So I have a composition one, and then Photoshop.
Mm-hmm.
And composition is important because still life photography is so hard, and we have to create a scene from nothing. And I think that's one of the hardest
That's a
things that you
tricky.
can do in
Yeah,
photography. So
I agree.
that's really important. You need that before you get to the editing stage. But the editing is what I'm really passionate about. And I also teach
Mm-hmm.
tethering, which is kind of like it bridges composition and editing together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I love learning the parts of editing. And for me, it's really like sitting down with that final image and putting all those beautiful final touches on it before you put it out into the world. I find it very calming and therapeutic. I know not everybody feels like that, but
Yeah.
I just hope to share like my joy and passion for it to help people like
Mm-hmm.
just put those final touches on. So
Oh, that's great. And which of the courses would you say is the best one to start with if people want to
I
start
think it
learning your
depends
tricks?
on, yeah, it depends on your level. So
Mm-hmm.
I create courses a little bit like how I like to learn. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't like to do courses that like touch on a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of go into it being like, I want to learn how to use Photoshop. and I want to know how to do this and this and this and this and that. And so I sort of created my courses to like really focus on that one particular skill. So I think it's really thinking to yourself, like, what is the next thing that I need to learn to like move my photography and my photography career forward. So I do always like, people will come to me and I'll say, just send me an Instagram, like I'll take a look and I can give you my advice and tell you what I think would be the next step for you. Because the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to take all the courses at once, get overwhelmed because there are so many pieces to do. So I think working on like the next thing that's going to move your photography forward, and then just really diving into those skills and practicing, and then things will start to come a little bit second nature, and then you can like take a new thing on. So if you're fresh out of the gate, sometimes if your composition isn't really strong, then it doesn't matter what you do editing wise. You need to sort of work on that first piece. But then once you get like the hang of that, then we can start moving into editing. So that's sort of like what I suggest.
So start with composition, and then probably as a beginner start with Lightroom and then go into Photoshop.
Yes.
Because Lightroom is easier for them.
Yeah, and Photoshop is more, when we want to retouch things, like removing blemishes, removing objects, compositing things together. So that's the next sort of more advanced skill that I would recommend. But yes, I guess I don't have a course on light, but I have an ebook. But yeah, light is very important.
Yeah, light is very important. And because I've done the composition course, by the way. It's really, really good. So I really recommend.
Thank you.
It's really good because composition was one of the hardest parts for me, because I'm not coming really from the art background. I don't know, like I really need to learn things before I can start playing around. So I think the composition
and I think
course
that's
really
one
helps.
of the myths that's out there, is like you are born creative, and that nobody is born knowing these things. Some people will have an eye for things, and sometimes we actually get more sort of like compositional information from our environment, like what's aesthetically pleasing. Like a lot of us actually get that just by living and looking at nature. But the idea is like, how do you, like, if this looks aesthetically pleasing, how do you replicate that? So then you can actually learn those tools. So really, I was not super artistic before I started in photography. So if I can learn it, anyone can learn it.
Nice. That's good to know, right? Like,
I think it's encouraging, because a lot of the time, like if you saw my Instagram now, you would just think maybe I was just lucky, or maybe I always had it in me. It's 100% not the case. It's very hard to see someone 10 years in and think, they started exactly where you did. But 95% of the time, that's exactly how it happens.
Yeah, and that is indeed very encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And then I'm actually thinking about following the Photoshop course. So I'm just wondering, how much is it from, let's say, for the beginners, or how much is there like for advanced? Because I've been editing for many years, but I still feel like I probably can learn a lot from it, no?
From the Photoshop?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so Photoshop is a huge program. Like, it can do so much. And I think when I first started out, it was so overwhelming. It's not intuitive. Like, you can't just move a slider and see what happens. You actually have to pick a tool, you have to set a setting, and then you have to know how to apply it. It's honestly like painting with a canvas. So it was very overwhelming for me, but there was a point where I had to have it, because a client was like, I don't like what you did here, you need to remove it. And I was like, whoa, I can't do that. So over my career, I realized there was like 5 main things that people or clients will want you to do. So what I do is I teach, and I actually teach the course with my husband, which is very so nice, because he sort of taught me everything that I know, and he's very knowledgeable. So we teach it together, and we just start out with, here is how Photoshop like works in terms of layering and masking, and then we just cover like the 5 things that you need to know, like the 5 techniques. So like removing objects, straightening things, compositing, and then like light sort of enhancements and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we cover those. So it's like we start out with like foundations and move up. So even if you like are really good at editing, Photoshop is the idea can be it's a little bit different. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had students who couldn't even open Photoshop who are now like layering and masking. So
Uh-huh.
we cover how to get set up. And then I think the thing that's really exciting, I find exciting, is that there's it's Photoshop is one of those things where you have to sort of problem solve. So you look at a thing and you're like, okay, I want to remove this object.
Mm-hmm.
There could be 4 ways that you could do that. So we kind of go through like, here are the 4 different ways,
Uh-huh.
because every image that you come across, there'll be one of those ways that is going to get you better results than the other. So it's more about like getting you to think about like how you can use those tools to match what you need to do. So it is more of a sort of like an advanced skill, but if you're a Photoshop beginner, we will 100% take care of you, and we will make sure that you know exactly which tools to use and when to get those things done in the images that you need.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I think I use Photoshop with every photo now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can integrate Photoshop with Lightroom and Capture One so that you have a seamless workflow. So that's what I do now. And I'm always just doing a little bit of retouching. Not that you necessarily need it, but I think you get to a point in your career where just a couple of changes can really just polish an image. You know, we're not there to like modify or perfect. It's just if you can remove a few little distractions, suddenly the melted chocolate is like the most important thing. And that's what we're really trying to do as a photographer, is push people to those like stories and the most important hero elements in our photo to tell that story.
Exactly. And because you can still do it with, let's say, Lightroom, and you can still do the removing, let's say, objects in Capture One, but it's just way more complicated than with Photoshop.
Yeah, you get a lot more control with Photoshop. So sometimes it's a matter of like just knowing which tools and like the settings. So I think it's one of those programs you just need someone to walk you through, because again, you just don't have a slider that you can use to see, you know, what happens. So
indeed.
Yeah,
Nice. Awesome. Well, I have a couple of closing questions for you.
Sure.
What is most fun for you about your work?
Most fun. That is an interesting one. It is interesting because photography, I don't know if photography's become less fun for me over the years, but because it's become my job and I'm always seeking to improve my skills, it's just become something different. But if I think about like was most fun, I would say it's probably beverage work right now. Maybe because I'm just really inspired, or I've found some creative momentum with that. I really enjoy retouching like bottles at the moment. I just love the analytical process of thinking of getting all those assets and then seeing them to come to life. So that's currently what I'm excited by.
That's a tricky one, the bottle photography. Wow.
Yeah, well, it is and it isn't. I think once you, at the beginning, yes, but I took Rob Grimm's beverage photography course.
Me too. I did that too.
Yeah, which was really interesting. So I think it's really like it's great to learn. Maybe it's because it's like a different sort of niche. If we think outside of food photography, my husband has a bit of a problem with collecting film cameras. He has many. And we took this like really just point and shoot old plastic, no settings camera to a wedding just to take some film shots. So I think those sort of things slow you down and you get to do something different. We're finding that to be fun right now.
Fun, yeah, super. Oh, it's so much fun. Awesome. Then I was wondering if you have some recommendations of books or courses or, let's say, other photographers that are good sources for inspiration and learning, besides, of course, your wonderful courses, because that's...
I would say trying to find things outside your niche. So when I did the beverage photography course, And let me know if you want me to send the link to that. Um, it was more like commercial levels, so something very different to what
Mm-hmm.
I was normally doing. But you just see how other people work and how a different industry works and how a
Mm-hmm.
different level of photographer works to you. There's just so invaluable to get some of those skills. I would also say B. Lubas. I love everything that woman does, and I've been lucky enough to teach beside her. Um, so like attending her workshops,
Mm-hmm.
she thinks very differently to me, and that's just wonderful because then I get a sense of something maybe less analytical than I am.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she really taught me a lot about color. So a lot of the color that I explore these days is because she gave me like the confidence and understanding through like her workshops and the things she does on Instagram too. So I highly recommend anything that B does is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And then my husband actually, I mean, he doesn't have a course per se, but he's like a photographer and he shoots for like a clothing company.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find really amazing about his work is the way he uses lines, because it's very, like it's not still life where you create everything. He's taking the environment and making it interesting. So I think finding things outside your niche and how you can bring them into your work is really cool too. There's lots of food photography books out
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah,
I
especially
loved
now.
Joni Simon's
Yeah.
book, Picture Perfect Food.
Yeah.
And what Joni does really well is like she is so good at bringing stories in from her life into her work. I don't
Mm-hmm.
do that as much. And I think it's a really interesting way of like looking back on experiences that you had and how you can bring in some of those elements for you into your work.
Mm-hmm.
So I would highly recommend just reading that book and thinking about how she does the storytelling. Like she talks about there was a time like she went to brunch with family and like
Uh-huh.
how she could bring those feelings in from when she was younger into her work. So you can be inspired by the scenery around you. Like I could be inspired by the colors of where I live and like how do I bring that in. So just I always any way that other people see is just so fascinating and really important, I think.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hopefully that helps. That was a long answer.
Yeah, these are good, very, very good tips. Very, very good ones. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Then my last question for you would be, where can the listeners find you?
So I'm on Instagram at Two Loves Studio. So that's
Mm-hmm.
my Instagram. And then my blog is twolovestudio.com. So I have lots of resources on there about food photography. I just solely write about food photography. So it's a great way to like learn about, like you could want to learn about focus or camera settings, lenses, composition editing, pricing, so many things. So those are the main two ways that you can find me. I also reply to all the blog comments. So I know blog comments aren't as cool as, they were about 7 years ago, but if you still leave me a blog comment, I will reply.
Oh, nice. Perfect. Well, Rachel, thank you so much. This was such a great information. I'm sure the listeners are going to love us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.